We've got a full hour ahead, but let's kick it off with our focus on China. Because Eamon Javers, who you might have seen on this network like 30 seconds ago, has more on Trump's call with China's president and the upcoming meeting between Trump and the president of China, which I assume, Eamon, you will probably be in South Korea next month.
We'll see. I'm trying to make sure my passport's updated, though, Brian, before we do that. So here's what we know. The call started around 8 a.m. this morning. It ended around 11 a.m. this morning, East Coast time. So obviously a lengthy discussion between the two leaders. And we know that ByteDance, the parent company of TikTok, put out a statement a short time ago, maybe within the past hour or so. And here's what they said. They say, "We thank President Xi Jinping and President Donald J. Trump for their efforts to preserve TikTok in the United States. ByteDance will work in accordance with applicable laws to make sure that TikTok remains available to American users through TikTok US." So that's attributable to a TikTok spokesperson. Here's what the president put on social media earlier today. The president taking to Truth Social with a statement. He said, "I just completed a very productive call with President Xi of China. We made progress on many very important issues, including trade, fentanyl, and the need to bring the war between Russia and Ukraine to an end, and the approval of the TikTok deal." The president goes on in the second part of the statement here to say the call was a very good one. We will be speaking again by phone. Appreciate the TikTok approval, and both look forward to meeting at APEC. So the president there talking about the TikTok approval here in the past tense. That is, this is a deal that has been done. No specifics yet from either side on what exactly was agreed to, and no answer from either side to this important national security question of what happens to the TikTok algorithm, whether or not the Chinese would have access to it, whether they are selling the algorithm to this consortium of American buyers, and who will have control of that, how much data might flow back and forth between the sides. As contemplated, this deal involves several American investors buying about an 80% share of TikTok US. The Chinese would retain about 20%, and then the United States would have a reconstituted board of directors here, and that would include one member, at least as some media reports have it, one member of the board appointed by the U.S. government. So we'll wait and see all the specifics of this deal, when that can be announced. We'll see if the White House has something to say before close of business today, guys. Back over to you.
All right, look forward to you going into that big White House behind you. Eamon Javers, thank you very much. All right, so there are obviously then some encouraging signs about a kind of détente with China's leadership, and that has maybe helped power China stocks. The FXI and the KWEB ETFs and many others are soaring. The FXI large cap China-based ETF is now up 15% in just 90 days. Let's talk about that and more. Kyle Bass, founder and chief investment officer at Heyman Capital Management, joins us now. Kyle, great to chat with you, especially on a Friday. If you were going to advise the president about something he would want to get from Xi Jinping at that meeting in South Korea, what would it be?
Well, we can start with the TikTok deal, Brian. In the end, President Xi and ByteDance all along have said they would never allow control of the algorithm to leave their hands. And the appellate court, the Supreme Court, and the law, the Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversary Control Act, specifically states that we can't take anything short of control and ownership of that algorithm. The fact that this deal is not fully announced yet tells me that there's still a pretty significant hurdle here in this transaction. And in the end, the buyers group of Oracle and Andreessen and Silver Lake, again, they're going to need to own the algorithm and have the Chinese government or ByteDance not going to have any control of that algorithm. It can't be a licensing.
Then why would China want it then? Because number one, I'm assuming the TikTok deal is just kind of a larger vessel for something else. I mean, it's a social media site. It's big. It's important. So it matters. But to me, it seems like more of a bigger picture thing. You can address that. But also, if you don't have that algorithm, then China's leadership doesn't have that direct line to the American consumer, a lot of younger American consumers. And I'm assuming that's what the real value is.
It is. I mean, it's the greatest tell of all, Brian. If TikTok does, somewhere between 15 and 20 billion in revenue in the United States, this thing's worth, I don't know what the number is. It's worth at least $50 billion, if not more. And if she is willing to just let it go dark, as opposed to receiving $50 billion, it's the biggest poker tell of all time as to what the intent and what the rationale for China's ownership of the algorithm originally was and currently still is. So, if you read any of the amicus briefs in the Supreme Court, Matt Pottinger, former head of the National Security Council under Trump 1, wrote an amazing brief calling TikTok digital fentanyl. It's just as bad as the fentanyl that China is sending to Mexico and killing, hundreds of thousands of Americans each year.
I would assume then if this TikTok deal is not done, if it's never completed, the two sides can't come to some agreement where we transfer, to your point, that ownership stake to the United States, that itself also would be a tell.
100%. 100%.
All right, I want to ask you about the Federal Reserve, if I can, Kyle, okay, because our friend Jim Bianco, very smart guy in the bond market, calling the Fed meeting this week a, quote, mess, because the Fed members have sort of all future guesstimates of interest rates that some are calling for huge cuts. One's calling, I think, for a raise. A bunch are calling for nothing. Jerome Powell himself called it a risk management cut. Do you agree with Jim Bianco that the meeting was, quote, a mess, and that maybe the risk management cut was Jay Powell just trying to get the president off his back?
Well, I mean, Brian, if you go back and look at the BLS revision, you look at last year, the Biden administration overstated the number of jobs created by a total of 1.5 million jobs. Brian, that number is hard to fathom. It's hard to believe that was done. And so in the last 4 or 5 months, we basically had a jobless economy. We are at a full stall. And so if all of that data was out there before the last Fed meeting, we certainly would have cut in the last meeting. I expect them to cut 2 more times this year and 4 or 5 times next year. I think the new kind of neutral rate, Brian, is somewhere 3% or lower. So I think you're going to see future cuts. Now, that being said, if you read the Fed's statement, they cut, it was a dovish cut, and yet they increased both their inflation and their economic expectations for 2026. That was the head scratcher for me. When you look at what they actually wrote after the cut, I've never seen that before. So if you want to call it a mess, I would call it a mixed signaling for sure. But in the end, what you're seeing is inflation is moderating after I think we've had 50% inflation since COVID first set in certainly in asset prices and many goods and services. So, having a year over year kind of 2.5% number is not going to be that hard, especially in a jobless economy. The question is how many jobs does AI actually take out?
That is the question, and I'm not sure, Kyle, we're going to let you go today, but I don't think anybody right now knows the answer. Almost every technology improvement has added jobs and killed some, but added others. I don't know if AI is the same. I was actually talking about this at home last night because I'm really, really boring. Kyle Bass, Heyman Capital Management. Kyle, my friend, have a great weekend. Thank you very much.
Pleasure, Brian. You too.
All right. Thank you. All right, folks, do you want a new iPhone 17? Well, the doors at Apple are now open for business. And Steve Kovac will tell you there have been some lines. We'll hear from him and then a top analyst on Apple. Stick around.